Ceramic tile is an excellent choice for a countertop. In addition to its beauty, ceramic tile resists heat, moisture, and stains. As with all tiling projects, planning and surface preparation are the keys to success. In this demonstration, we'll show you how to prepare the substrate, install backerboard, and tile a kitchen counter with a V-cap edge.
Before you begin, protect the base cabinets from damage and falling mortar by covering them with plastic sheeting or construction paper. Also place a drop cloth on the floor.
Countertop tiles must be set on a surface that's level, solid, and can withstand moisture. If you're going to be tiling the front edge, the base also must be thick enough to accommodate the edging you've chosen. The minimum requirement is 3/4 inch exterior grade plywood attached with 1 1/4 inch drywall screws. Shim the top as needed to get it level. If the counter you're tiling has an existing countertop surface, it's best to remove it and start with a new base and backerboard.
Measure and cut the opening for the sink. If you're installing a new sink, it may come with a template. If you're reusing an old sink, measure the opening after you remove it. Make sure the placement of the sink leaves enough space so the faucet will clear the wall behind the counter. Also adjust the location if possible, so that when you install the tile, the cut tiles on the left and right side of the sink are the same size for a balanced look.
After making the cutout, drill a 3/8 inch starter hole inside the cutout near one of the corners, and use a saber saw to remove the cutout.
To install the backerboard, measure and mark the pieces based on the dimensions of the counter and the backsplash. Make sure no joints cross the hole for the sink. To cut the backerboard, mark cutoff lines on both sides of the panel with a felt tip pen or carbide scoring tool. Align a straight edge with the line on the side of the panel and pull the scoring tool along it several times. Make as many passes as you need to break through the surface. Do the same on the other side of the panel. With the backerboard on a flat surface, press down one side of the cut line with your hand and knee. With the other hand, lift up just enough to snap the board along the scored edges. Some types of backerboard may leave a sharp edge along the cut line, so be careful when handling the cut board. Dry fit the backerboard sections on top of the plywood, covering the entire surface. Make sure the edges of the backerboard and the plywood base are all perfectly flush.
Leave 1/8 inch gaps between the adjacent panels using 16 penny spacer nails.
Also leave a 1/8 inch gap at the back of the countertop for expansion.
Using the existing cutout as your guide, trace the perimeter of the sink hole on the underside of the backerboard. Or, if you are using a large sink like we are, cut backerboard pieces to fit around it.
Cut it out using a circular saw with a dry cutting diamond blade, and finish the corners with a jigsaw. We're now ready to install the backerboard.
Mix your latex modified thin set mortar as instructed in the techniques section of Tiling 123.
Using a 1/8 inch square notch trowel, apply an even layer of mortar to the plywood and comb it into straight vertical ridges. Set the pieces of backerboard in place on the mortar. Remember to leave 1/8 inch gaps at the joints. Use 16D spacer nails, but don't drive them into the plywood. Also remember to leave a 1/8 inch gap at the back of the countertop for expansion.
Attach the panels with backerboard screws. Place them 4 inches on center and 1/2 inch from the edge all the way around each panel. You may find it easier to start the screws if you tap them lightly with a hammer to start them. Drive the screws until the heads are flush with the surface.
To avoid breaking off a corner, keep the screws 2 inches from the corners of the board.
Place screws every 6 inches on both directions in the field of each board.
Spread mortar on the backerboard strip for the backsplash and set it in place, leaving a 1/8 inch gap above the countertop. Attach it with screws. Once all the panels are in place, remove all the spacers. Fill the spaces between the panels with mortar. Use a margin trowel to smooth it out and form a 3-inch wide band centered on the joint. For reinforcement, put fiberglass backerboard tape across each joint and firmly embed it into the mortar.
Cover the joints with additional mortar and smooth it with a trowel. Don't expose the tape, just feather the edges of the mortar.
Apply a coat of mortar to the edges of the countertop. Wrap them in fiberglass tape and apply a skim coat of mortar.
Once the mortar is dry, we're ready to mark our layout lines. We're going to be using edge tiles, but if you're using cap tiles, hold one of them against the front edge of the counter, mark the location of the back joint, and do the same at the other end of the counter. Snap a layout line between the marks. This will be your first joint line. If you're tiling an L-shaped counter, measure and mark the other leg as well.
Where the layout lines intersect will be the location of the first full tile. This will ensure full tiles along both front edges. Snap additional lines to divide the rest of the countertop into sections or grids.
Attach a 1x2 batten under the front edge of the counter to support the trim tiles, and you're ready to start setting the tile.
Using a square notched trowel, spread and comb an even layer of mortar along the edge of the counter up to the layout lines. Put 2 edge tiles in place next to each other and press them firmly into the mortar. If the mortar squeezes up between the tiles, the bed is too thick and the ridges need to be shorter. Lift up one of the tiles and look at the bottom. The mortar should cover the entire surface. If you see parallel lines, the mortar is too dry. If the ridges of the mortar have left solid lines on the tile, the mortar bed is too thin and you need to increase the height of the ridges. Remove both tiles, recomb the area you just tested, and reset the first tile. Twist the tile back and forth slightly to make sure that it's embedded in the mortar. Continue setting the rest of the edge tiles the same way.
Use a damp sponge to clean off any mortar that sticks to the top of the tiles before it dries, or you can carefully use a putty knife. To install your tiles, start at the intersection of the 2 original layout lines you snapped. Spread and comb thin set into the area.
Place a corner of the first tile at the intersection. Twist it back and forth slightly to embed it in the mortar. Continue setting the entire row of field tiles adjacent to the edge tiles. Once the first row is set, continue to work outward toward the back of the counter and around the sink. Use a damp sponge to clean up any excess mortar as you go. Set all the full tiles first and leave any cut tiles on the perimeter and around the sink for last. As you work, periodically check for flatness with the level. If you need to level any tiles, place a beater bar on top of the tiles and tap it lightly with a hammer or a rubber mallet.
To tile the backsplash, spread and comb mortar onto the backer board, and then place the vertical tiles. To allow enough space for grout, set the tiles on 1/8 inch shims, or you can use spacers. If the backsplash is only a single row high, you can use bullnose tile to finish the top. We're using small pieces of cut tile to finish. Cut and back butter each piece and press it into place. Once all the tiles are set, we're ready to grout. If you're using unglazed tile on the countertop, seal it with penetrating sealer before grouting.
Grouting fills the space between the tiles. It's messy, so be sure to cover any areas you don't want to get dirty. Before you start, remove any excess mortar with a razor blade. Using a margin trowel, mix the powdered grout with liquid as recommended in the technique section. You have choices to make when choosing the grout color for a countertop. White grout will emphasize darker tile, but it needs to be regularly cleaned and sealed to prevent staining. Selecting a color that closely matches the color of the tile will help hide stains. If you're using a high glazed tile, which scratches easily, use a non-sanded grout. Apply the grout as described in the technique section. Skim off the excess grout with the edge of the float. To avoid digging into the joints, move the float diagonally across the tiles. The grout will set up in about 5 to 15 minutes and have a putty-like consistency. When a thumbnail pressed against it doesn't leave an impression, the grout is hard enough for the final cleanup. With a damp sponge, wipe the tiles diagonally to clean them. Rinse the sponge frequently in clean water. Remove any remaining haze as instructed in the technique section. If you have trouble removing the haze, use an acid tile cleaner. Let the grout cure completely as recommended by the manufacturer. Once it's cured, apply a food-safe sealer with a sponge. Sealing gives the grout greater water and mildew resistance and helps keep it from getting dirty. Make sure to wipe off any excess within 10 minutes. Don't let it dry on the tile. Once the sealer has cured, the project's done.